Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Mario de Armas, and with me today is Carmine Vidana. Our topic today will be anger management in marriages. How are you today, Carmine?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Mario. How about yourself?
Doing very well, thank you. And it's so wonderful to have you here to broach this interesting topic, and looking forward to your insights throughout. Before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your clinical background, your history?
Sure. Well, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I've been with Wellspring a little over 6 years, and I enjoy working with couples and with adults.
Wonderful, wonderful. And this is definitely your area, helping couples in this process, sorting through their differences, seeing, their common traits and where they can find that common ground. So as we broach this topic, I wanted to ask you, just to open up, how would you define anger, and is it a healthy option, an
Sure.
emotion?
Yeah. Anger is normal. I mean, I think if we're honest, I know I have some anger, right? Who doesn't? However, it's how we express it. That's what determines whether it is healthy or unhealthy. And according to the Britannica Dictionary, anger is a strong feeling of being upset or annoyed because of something wrong or bad. The feeling that makes someone want to hurt people or to shout. And according to Larry Crabb, who's a Christian psychologist, he passed away this year. He would define it as a strong feeling of annoyance, pain, or frustration caused by a blocked goal we have set for ourselves, either consciously or unconsciously. And when goals are blocked, it's normal to feel frustrated or furious, depending how important that goal seemed to us. Dr. Crabb also went on to say that every human being longs for the security of relationship and the significance of purpose. And I do agree with that statement, that we all want security and significance. And when these desires are unmet, and they are going to be unmet this side of heaven, we feel valid pain. Right.
Yes.
So that's definitely, I think, important that anger is going to be part of the human experience. And it's important to distinguish between goals and desires. A goal is an objective that is under my control. I can decide to minister to somebody at my church, to serve somebody at my church. I can decide to go back to school. I can decide to lose weight. However, desire is an objective. Usually our desires are good, but I cannot reach this desire through my efforts alone, right? An example might be a Christian wanting their spouse to be committed to the Lord. You want your child to make good grades. You want your spouse to lose weight. But once again, a goal is only something that I can reach on my own. The desire is just that. It's a longing, right?
Yes.
So according to Crabb, when these goals and desires are blocked, we're going to feel anger.
Yeah, and it's that relationship between the two, right? Do you think oftentimes couples don't communicate their desires and then subsequently establish goals? Is it sort of something they harbor?
Yes, that's great, Marie. That's great insight. It happens so often. And that's why I always like to educate my couples between the difference. Goal is something you can do on your own. And a desire is something you can communicate to your spouse, but you cannot reach that or overpower.
Exactly.
Your spouse in that area, right? But it is so important to communicate our desires. And they're legitimate. Most of our desires are going to want to be, it's going to be a blessing to our spouse a lot of times. I mean, it's a lot of times it's going to be good, but We don't have the
Absolutely.
control. That's the piece of it. We don't have control over those legitimate desires.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis spoke a lot about desires and God placing them within us. But yeah, that also requires discernment. And at some point saying, okay, I long for this and you have your own desires as well. How do we concretize them? Because
Exactly.
otherwise anger does emerge. And it's interesting in our discussion talking about the roots of anger. And you had a lot of interesting insights on that score.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mario. Yeah, the common roots are fear, pain, and frustration. And I really would put pain at the top, right? Because fear and frustration are really linked under pain. But fear is when the legitimate goal of feeling secure is threatened. Many people express their fear as anger over uncertainty, fear of losing their job, fear of losing someone, fear of losing control. That's a big one. I mean, I think we saw this with COVID-19, the pandemic, the lockdowns. There was a lot of anger, a lot of people realizing we are not in control. We cannot buy what we want at the grocery store. There were things that were missing, things that were so different, and just going to work, we couldn't go to work. I mean, we really are not in control. We really are not. We have an illusion that we are. But I think realizing that definitely can trigger anger. The next one is pain, and that's when the legitimate goal of feeling significant or having a certainty that we are engaged in a responsibility that is truly important and purposeful is unmet. We commonly feel pain. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. People express this pain by feeling unimportant or invisible as anger over being dismissed, disrespected, or overlooked.
Right.
And lastly, that frustration is when we desire our world keep us feeling comfortably loved and significant. And when this desire is blocked, we may feel frustrated. Our goal is blocked. We feel something good is missing. And commonly, people express their frustrations as anger. Yeah. So that's why I said earlier that anger is normal. It's normal because, who doesn't have fears? Who doesn't have pain? Who doesn't have frustrations?
It actually signals the three. Yeah. It points to those three. So unresolved pain, unresolved fear, then oftentimes surfaces in that way. Yes. And that's where we kind of come to that point of how does the dynamic within that setting, come forth.
Right. That's how do we express it? There is a lot of unresolved anger. Unresolved pain is going to come out probably in open aggression. It's probably going to come out in more of a violent way because that pain, those fears, that frustration is still alive, so to speak. They haven't been resolved.
Exactly. Either we vocalize it or it dictates a lot of the things that we do. So it's a subtle difference, but once we can actually bring it to the light and see what's at the root, then oftentimes it leads to the reconciliation, the understanding of the other's challenges and concerns. So yes, it is a powerful thing to discuss. And then when you look at anger, it's divided in different ways. We were talking about that earlier too, right? The common types of anger. Yes.
There are 3 common types. The first one is passive aggression. And this is where we get the term passive aggressive. You're a passive aggressive person, or that person is a passive aggressive. This involves acting indirectly aggressive rather than directly aggressive, right? An example might be a teenager who keys his parents' car instead of confronting them about what he thinks is an unreasonable curfew. Okay, another one may be a husband agrees to go to an unpleasant event with the wife, and when the time comes to go, he bails out at the last minute, right? So passive aggression a lot of times has an element of punishment to it. It's subtle. It's more of a subtle type of anger. And we see in 2 Samuel chapter 1, the story of David and Bathsheba. And we're not going to get into the whole story, but just the piece where Bathsheba and David had an affair, and Bathsheba conceived, and Bathsheba was married. And her husband, Uriah, was in David's army fighting. And David sent word to the commander, put Uriah in the front line so that he could be killed anyway.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So.
No, that's a whole soap opera right there.
Yeah, that's definitely a soap opera. Exactly. Yeah. So, and then the next type is open aggression, and this is acting overtly and demonstrably aggressive. An example might be a husband who pounds his fist on the table, a husband or wife who takes their spouse's cell phone and slams it on the ground, a wife who screams or berates her husband. Any type of physical or verbal assault is under open aggression, and definitely domestic violence falls under this category of anger. And just wanted to take a minute here, and if you are undergoing domestic violence, there is help available. There's a domestic violence hotline. Just give the number 1-800-799-7233. If you're in a church, you can reach out to your pastor, perhaps to a leader. Wellspring has counselors that are qualified to help you. You don't have to suffer alone. And in the Bible, we see in Genesis chapter 16, Abraham and Sarah abusing Hagar. And Hagar was Sarah's maidservant, and Sarah basically ordered her to have sexual relations with Abraham. She did, she conceived, and then Sarah turned against her. And the word says Sarah abused her. And it also implies that Abraham knew what was going on. And Abraham said, do what you want with her. And Sarah basically banished her to the desert, and God intervened, and Hagar came back, thankfully. Here we see the Lord having mercy on Hagar. But the point here was that there was abuse. There was abuse.
Yes.
Yeah. And then lastly, which is the one that we want to strive for, is assertive anger. And this involves nonviolent yet firm displays of anger, assertive displays of anger. Once again, not all anger is bad. It's the expression of it that makes it so.
Exactly.
You got that? And mature couples stop and they try to understand the cause of their anger. And then they approach their spouse to communicate what's going on without trying to hurt them. You know, that's so important, because when we're in the heat of an argument, a lot of times it's easy to think, oh, our spouse is our enemy. Feels like he or she is an enemy, right?
Right.
We have to repeat that to ourselves. You know, he or she is not my enemy. And we see Jesus in Matthew 21 in the temple, right? Where people were making the temple a den of robbers instead of a house of prayer, right? This was basically an injustice that was being done. And he handled it very assertively. And once again, you can read it in Matthew 21, but he did not curse, you know, he did not hit the people, he didn't hit the animals, you know, he was just very assertive, like, this needs to change. This needs to, this is a house of prayer.
Right.
So he did
Exactly.
speak into it.
Right. And that's where anger in response to an injustice, or anger to address a wound, a concern, properly expressed, is healthy, right? And that's where, on the one end, anger that's reckless and hurtful and destructive is the type of anger that can be divisive. But anger expressed the right way gives permission for your partner, your husband, your wife, to also respond accordingly. And it leads to that dialogue that's so important in maintaining a relationship grounded in faith. And that's such a great distinction on your part. When we come back, we're actually going to broach the subject of anger as a secondary emotion. But loving this conversation, Carmine, and looking forward to continuing this whole sequence of topics.
Thank you.
So we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Mario de Armas here with Carmine Vidana. We've been discussing the topic of anger management in marriage. If you've joined us just recently, you could find us on your favorite podcast channel, on Wellspring on the Air, or on our website blog page at wellspringmiami.org. Just search for this topic. So Carmine, we've had a lot to discuss, and now we're moving into this idea of anger as a secondary emotion. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, the researchers, Doctors John and Julie Gottman, coined the term the anger iceberg. They were the first ones. And we can see the tip of an iceberg, when you think of an iceberg in the water, but most of it is underwater, out of sight. And it's the same thing when we see anger, right? That's why we call it a secondary emotion, because you can see the tip, which is the angry behavior, but the largest part of the iceberg, what we can't see under the surface, is usually pain of some kind. And a lot of times it's easier to be angry than to be sad. Easier to be angry than to be vulnerable. So, pain can be grief, it can be jealousy, it can be loneliness, fear, anxiety, exhaustion, embarrassment, feeling rejected, right? So you've got to really be willing to be authentic, be vulnerable, and say, hey, I'm really feeling sad, instead of just displaying that anger, because it's easier to display that anger many times. And that's why it is a secondary emotion. And the Gottman research led to understanding that anger is a mask or a cover for deeper emotions.
Exactly. Well, you break the spell, right? It stops becoming a competition to see who wins the argument, who has the better point. This back and forth that's very cyclical.
Very, yes.
And it gets to the core.
Right. That's what we want to do. And our spouses can be triggers, Mario. I've been married for a while, almost 30 years, and I can definitely attest, I can be a trigger for my husband and he can be one for me. And the word says, as one man as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens the other, right?
That's
so
right.
There's a lot of friction. And
That's
if we
right.
have a lot of pain in our souls, if there is past trauma, the displayed anger may definitely be that open aggression that we were talking about earlier.
That's right. No, absolutely. And it's just great to be able to bring it to the light and to have that self-awareness, because entering that conversation with all that baggage can lead to almost a more, a good way to put it, just a frustrating interaction.
Yeah, fireworks.
Fireworks, and then you're rendered discouraged, and nothing fruitful comes forth. But being able to say, wow, this is really more about me being hurt over a comment said to me the other day, or your spouse feeling neglected in this particular area, then all of that is fuel for that interaction.
Definitely.
What about the genetic and environmental factors?
Yeah, so nature or nurture, right? That's always the question. And the answer is both. There was a study done in 2008 by Koch, and he stated that neglecting to provide early basic physical needs and emotional support as a parent can later lead to higher scores of aggression in childhood, right? So we're talking about some trauma here. And so that definitely isn't surprising. Also, a 2017 University of Montreal study on a set of 555 twins, sets of 555 twins revealed that aggressive behavior in 6-year-old children share most of the same genetic factors. All right, so it's really both. Research also has found that anger is a risk factor for heart disease, as well as high blood pressure, headaches, skin disorders, and digestive problems. A lot of negative illnesses come from anger. This is interesting, and this is an environmental factor. According to the research group, legal templates, divorce rates were up 34%. 34%.
Wow.
That's a lot, right? Between March and June of 2020, compared to that same time in 2019, right? And their data also showed that marital unhappiness and the desire to separate peaked April 13th, 2020. Do you remember what was happening during that?
Oh, yes. Wow.
Right?
What a correlation there.
The quarantine, state lockdowns, and domestic violence, other situations were also on the rise, but domestic violence also increased as well. So there's definitely a link between the environment and stress and strain.
Right. Because now you factor in the socioeconomic with the removal of certain escapes, and you're facing your difficulty or the trigger in an amplified way.
Exactly. You can't get away from the pain almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. And nurture is also just as important. Nature and nurture is at 50-50, who really knows, but what was modeled at home? That's very important. Did you undergo, viewing domestic violence? Was there a lot of fighting, or were you able to identify your feelings of anger and speak about them, and were they validated? But if you were taught something that was not healthy, you can definitely unlearn it. That's a good point. You can unlearn it. You don't have to stick with it for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And acquiring those tools, not just for your benefit today, but for how it plays out when life throws you a curveball, or when you're in a situation such as a pandemic, where you can implement those tools and lessons, plus the ongoing efforts to heal from our own wounds,
Right.
so that it does affect my relationship with my spouse as well. So all those factors definitely come into play. Yeah, there was also this observation from Dr. Robert Agnew at Emory.
Oh, yes. He did find research-based that there was a link between strain, right, environmental strain or strain in your life, and violence. There was definitely a strain there. And we know that anger, right? When there is violence, the emotion is anger. And he was able to research that and prove that.
And Carmine, how do you think anger affects marriages? Why is it so important to reflect on this issue?
Yes, this is the question. How does it affect marriages? It affects it greatly, because if there's a lot of anger, a lot of display of that open aggression, you're not going to be close. How can you, right? So it's important to reflect on it, Mario, because you can improve your marriage. You can have a stronger marriage. We know that it causes breakdown in connection, and marital distress is high. So working on it can make you a lot closer, a lot happier. Not working on it, is you're going to erode trust. We know it can lead to violence, it can lead to illness. It's also linked to insomnia. And by focusing on it and it can improve your relationship with your spouse and your relationship with God. James 1:19-20 says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." And it can also lead to peace because, yes, we are speaking about anger in the context of marriage, but it's not only about having that better connection with your spouse. It's primarily having that better connection with God and feeling better. Because if there's a lot of unresolved pain, unresolved trauma, you're not going to have peace. You're going to have moments of peace. So there are just so many reasons to be intentional, to reflect on.
Yes, that's so beautifully stated and such a fundamental point. And how would you say you can express discontent, like healthy expression of anger that honors God within that marriage?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, first you want to normalize it. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay. It's how we express it. What do we do with that anger? So you want to express it to yourself, validate that this is what you feel, and to God. This is what I'm feeling, God. Help me, pray. And then you want to, after you're controlled, then you're going to approach your spouse. And you're going to have a gentle startup, which is those I statements, not you. I felt hurt. I felt disrespected. I felt unloved. Timing is very important because you don't want to have this type of conversation when your spouse is tired, when he or she is getting ready for bed. So timing's important. Our words, choosing our words, God honoring words are so pivotal. And the other point here is that anger, if left, without looking at it, just left to itself, pushed down, can lead to depression.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's so important.
Which segues into the last point as far as what are other ways to deal with anger and what are the resources available so as to avoid just that depression.
Exactly. So you don't want to push it down. You want to normalize it. It can be hard to express it in a healthy way, but you can learn that, you may not have been taught in your family of origin. You may have fear when this emotion bubbles up in you. But that's okay. It's just an emotion. It's what you do with it that's destructive. It can be a blind spot. You may not even know. Right? But you can learn. There's the word, the Bible, books. There's so much information in this day and age. There's podcasts, and then there's counseling. But you want to think before you speak. You want to use those I statements. I felt disrespected when you forgot the cop and let me know you'd be late for dinner. I need you to communicate with me, and I would appreciate a text or a call. That's so important, right? To put the I statements there instead of, you're late. I can't believe you did this again to me. You always.
Right.
Get away from that.
No, it makes such a difference because one sort of provokes that defensive stance and the other one invites the dialogue to happen.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's what you want to do. Invite dialogue, communicate.
Absolutely. That's so wonderful. And all the resources you've provided have been so helpful. I think of a time where my mom and dad, who love each other so much, but also know how to push each other's buttons. My dad is a neat person, to say the least. He's like Danny Tanner at Full House. Everything is impeccable. And my mom was feeding my dog Cuban bred on the couch, and you saw my dad's face go purple, and he walked away. It was amazing. He went into his office, came back out, and my mom knew it. She goes, "I'm sorry."
Oh,
So it
wow.
was
What
it
a
was
good
that
example.
recognition and no
Mhm.
escalating,
Yes,
but also knowing what your partner likes and dislikes, and then being able to voice that
that's
uh,
right. And
is
calming
so vital.
yourself down, going for a walk before targeting, the conflict is great. Praying,
Exactly.
journaling, um, right? Focus on the family.org, familylifetoday.org, the Gottman Institute. Those are all great resources where they have articles, they have podcasts. There's also a website I just wanted to give out here. It's www.marriageministry.org/dealing with anger in marriage. And this is a quiz. So this will give you some insight as to anger, if it's really a problem, an issue in your marriage or not. If you have a blind spot, it may be surprising that, it is an issue, or you may get a result where, oh, not really a problem. And then the importance of counseling, if you need further help, is available. Counseling is a safe place. You can learn the research-based Gottman approach, what works in marriage, what doesn't. You can learn that soft startup instead of a harsh startup.
Yes.
Different perspectives, compromise, de-escalating. Your father was, just such a great example. He went into the
Oh,
other
yeah.
room. The other room is great, and calmed himself down.
I was very proud of him. I really was.
Yeah.
And Carmine, thank you for your knowledge, for your insight, and for joining us today and providing that faith perspective as well. And I look forward to many conversations in the future. As we wrap up, I want to thank you, and we hope that you all enjoyed the show titled Anger Management in Marriages. If you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcasts at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show was Anger Management in Marriages. Encourage us and let us know you are listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. This is Mario de Armas with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds